Hey everybody, welcome again to CMNH Trout Club TV. Jerry Dark is here with you. Today we're going to continue looking at some basic, simple to tie steelhead flies that are used all around the Great Lakes. Today we're going to look at the SuckerSpawn, or egg cluster fly as it's also called. We'll tie that and maybe a couple variations of it. And what do you say? Let's get started. Okay, so what do we need to tie this fly? Let's start with a really good quality heavy wet fly hook. Personally, I really like the curved shank scud hook. I just think that the bigger gap on that hook really holds a big fish like a steelhead better, and we'll use that in size 10 to 16. Any strong, thin diameter thread can be used. Generally, it'll be either fluorescent orange, fluorescent red, or chartreuse. Angora yarn was the first material used to make this fly, and it's probably still the favorite. Pale yellow and cream were the original colors, but you can find it today in a wide range of colors, and they can all be used. So the one thing that makes the Angora yarn special is its look in the water. It really becomes almost translucent. It almost glows in the water, looks really lifelike. And the brighter colors, when they get wet also, I mean, they work really well as attractors. We're also going to bring in some glow bug micro yarn to look at some variations of this pattern. Before we start tying, take the Angora yarn and cut it in lengths of about 2 inches. Then take each section of yarn and separate it into the individual plies. This will save a lot of time when you sit down and start tying a quantity of these flies. Okay, let's start off with what's considered to be the original version of this fly. So we're going to start off with a fluorescent red thread. We're going to get that on the hook shank, lay a pretty good base of the thread over the shank. We can go back and forth a little bit. We don't have to cover it 100%. Get part way around the bend of the hook. And then I'm going to take my Angora yarn that I've separated into the different sections or plies. Going to grab that down by the end and just lay that on top of the hook shank and secure it good. And really what we're going to do now is just make a series of loops up the hook shank. So I'm just going to pull this over, pinch it off kind of short, give it a wrap or two to snug it down, or 3. And really here's the key thing to this, is we got to get that thread in front of the yarn again in order to make the loops going up the hook shank. If we don't do that, it's almost impossible to do this fly. And as you can see, we're just going to have this series of loops going up the shank. We'll tie them down each time. You can vary them in size, make them a little bigger as you move forward. Normally, I don't think it really matters a whole lot. Till you get up close to the hook eye. Then we're going to trim the yarn short, form a little bit of a head, and then do a whip finish, 3 or 4 turns a couple times, and that's plenty to secure it. You don't need any varnish or anything to cover the threads. I always like to kind of push that up together and get that clump of yarn a little bit closer together, and you can see what we have here. The idea of this thing is the loops of yarn also get caught in the fish's mouth, in their teeth, makes it a little bit harder for them to spit it out if they want to. But this is the original SuckerSpawn coloration and everything. This fly came out of central Pennsylvania, and was originally used as a trout fly in the spring when suckers and other fish were spawning. Over a period of time, it migrated up to the Lake Erie tributaries. And really, over the years, it's been used in many places where trout in particular are eating eggs, and it's been successful. This one's tied on a number 10 hook, just to make it a little bit easier to see. But you can do these down to a 16 or so. It just depends on the application. Do you want them bigger for color, for visibility? Do you want to vary the size to actually try and match eggs? So all those things go into consideration depending where you're at and time of year. We'll tie a couple different variations of this pattern, but one way to give it a different look would be to add a glass bead onto the hook before tying, the basic pattern. This gives it a little bit of weight. There's also some extra flash in the water. Okay, let's take a look at a variation of this fly. We're going to add a little bit into it. I switched to a chartreuse thread this time. We're going to start it the same way. Procedure is pretty much the same on all of these styles of flies. Get a little thread base down there again. Again, I've got my Angora yarn all prepped already. And on a number 10 or 12 hook, usually use 3 sections of the yarn. If you're doing like a 14 or 16, you would cut down to 2 sections of the yarn. But we're going to start it the same way. Catch it and just bind it down on top of the hook shank. Make sure it's on there secure. We're going to start doing our loops forward. And again, we make that loop, pinch it down, bring the thread over top. Be sure you advance the thread in front of the yarn each time. We're going to put a couple thread loops on. And if we want to add a color spot onto this like we would do on a glow bug or something, I've taken a section of that glow bug micro yarn. Going to lay that on top. Bind that down tight. Again, pull this back and lock it in. Make our Angora yarn loop. Make sure that's bound on there nice and tight. We'll trim that off. Don't worry if you have a little bit sticking out at the eye of the hook. It doesn't really matter. Again, we're just imitating kind of a clump of eggs, or just putting color in the water as an attractor. Trim that, and I'm going to use a little sharper, stronger scissor to trim the glow bug yarn. Okay, but then you end up with that color spot in there nice and tight. This pattern is also called the blood dot. It was popularized by Pennsylvania fisherman and fly tyer Jeff Blood. But again, a simple variation of the SuckerSpawn fly, and you can combine all types of different color of Angora yarn and the glow bug micro yarn for this pattern. Okay, let's take a look at the final variation of this pattern that we're going to do today. So I've started the thread as we normally do. We're using our bright colored thread here. And this time for the body, I've taken a couple sections of the glow bug micro yarn. And probably the 4 key colors for this would be this steelhead, orange, and cheese that we have here, and then throw chartreuse and flame into the mix. And with this, we're making truly an attractor pattern. What I'm going to do is I'm going to lay these 2 strands of yarn side by side, bind them down on top of the hook. Okay, same procedure as we've done in the past. And we're just going to lay a series of yarn loops again up the hook. This yarn's a little bulkier, so it ties a little bit differently. But again, we're going to go up the hook shank the same way that we did before. Probably four loops to fill the space with this. This is, again, we're using the number 10 hook. And we'll take that up to just behind the eye. Okay. We have, again, sharper scissors that we're using to cut the glow bug yarn. Cutting that off short. We'll form a little bit of a head. Do our whip finish of 2 sets of 3 or 4 turns. That usually gets the job done. And we have this fly finished. And in this configuration, we call it scrambled eggs when it's done with the egg yarn. So we've seen 3 different, really, variations of this very similar style egg cluster fly, incorporating, a few different things, the Angora yarn and the micro glow bug yarn. These are usually fished in tandem with a nymph, and either fish tight line Euro-nymph style along the bottom, or suspended below an indicator to fish the lower part of the water column. So I hope that you enjoyed this presentation and learning these flies. We appreciate you watching. Again, this is Jerry Darkus for the Trout Club of the Cleveland Museum of Natural History. Again, we appreciate you taking the time to sit with us tonight and view this, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks very much.